There is a dangerous illusion that often destroys people long before anyone else notices. It is the illusion that you are above accountability, beyond correction, and immune to consequences. This is one of the greatest traps a narcissistic person falls into. They begin believing that because they have escaped consequences before, they always will. Because they have convinced some people, they believe they can deceive everyone. Because they have won a few battles, they assume they have already won the war. That kind of thinking is not strength. It is blindness disguised as confidence. True confidence is built on truth, humility, and a willingness to grow. False confidence is built on ego, denial, and the desperate need to feel superior. A narcissistic mindset often confuses these two. Instead of asking, "What can I learn?" it asks, "How can I prove I'm better?" Instead of listening, it speaks over others. Instead of reflecting, it deflects. Instead of accepting responsibility, it searches for someone else to blame. Over time, this creates a life built on fragile foundations. Everything may appear impressive on the outside, but underneath, the structure is already beginning to crack. Arrogance has a way of silencing the very voices that could prevent disaster. Wise people understand that correction is a gift. They know that honest feedback, even when uncomfortable, protects them from making costly mistakes. A narcissistic person often sees correction as an attack rather than an opportunity. The moment someone points out a flaw, they become defensive. The moment someone offers advice, they feel threatened. The moment someone disagrees with them, they see an enemy instead of a different perspective. This reaction keeps them trapped in the same destructive cycle because they refuse to receive the wisdom that could change their direction. Think about what happens when someone believes they are always the smartest person in every room. They stop asking questions. They stop learning. They stop growing, while everyone else continues developing new skills, building healthier relationships, and becoming wiser through experience. The arrogant person remains stuck. They may believe they are moving forward, but in reality, they are standing still while the world moves around them. Pride convinces them they have already arrived, leaving no room for transformation. This arrogance also affects the way they treat other people. When someone believes they are superior, they naturally begin treating others as if they are inferior. Conversations become competitions instead of connections. Relationships become opportunities for control instead of mutual respect. Every interaction becomes centered on protecting their image rather than understanding another person's heart. Eventually, people begin noticing the pattern. At first, they may excuse the behavior. They may think it is stress, insecurity, or a temporary phase. But patterns reveal character, and repeated arrogance slowly destroys trust. Trust cannot survive where respect does not exist. The more someone dismisses the feelings, opinions, and experiences of others, the more isolated they become. People may remain physically present for a season, but emotionally they begin stepping back. They stop sharing their thoughts. They stop seeking advice. They stop depending on the person who constantly belittles them. Eventually, they stop caring about maintaining the relationship altogether. What the arrogant person mistakes for loyalty is often nothing more than temporary tolerance. One of the greatest ironies is that arrogance often hides deep insecurity. The loudest claims of superiority frequently come from someone desperately trying to protect a fragile self-image. Instead of building genuine confidence through honesty, integrity, and personal growth, they build an image that demands constant admiration. The problem is that maintaining an image requires endless energy. Every conversation becomes a performance. Every success must be exaggerated. Every mistake must be denied. Every criticism must be attacked. Living this way becomes exhausting because the truth is always waiting to expose what pride is trying to hide. Life has a remarkable way of testing every person's character. Success can hide arrogance for a while, because victories often cover weaknesses. As long as things are going well, people may overlook unhealthy attitudes, but challenges reveal what success conceals. Difficult seasons expose whether someone has built their life on wisdom or on ego. When problems arise, the humble person adapts, learns, apologizes, and grows stronger. The arrogant person doubles down on denial, blames everyone else, and repeats the same mistakes. Instead of changing their strategy, they simply become louder, angrier, and more determined to prove themselves right. There is another reason arrogance becomes so destructive. It creates the illusion of control while quietly removing real influence. Genuine influence is earned through trust, consistency, kindness, and integrity. People willingly follow those they respect. They willingly listen to those who demonstrate wisdom through both words and actions. Fear may force temporary obedience, but it never creates lasting respect. A narcissistic person often mistakes compliance for admiration. They believe people agree with them because they are impressive, when in reality, many people are simply avoiding unnecessary conflict. The moment those people have the freedom to leave, they often do. Every relationship carries moments where humility is required. There are times when every person must admit they misunderstood something, handled a situation poorly, or hurt someone they care about. Those moments do not weaken a person's character. They strengthen it. They demonstrate emotional maturity and inner security. But arrogance refuses to admit fault because it believes perfection must be protected at all costs. Ironically, this desperate attempt to appear flawless creates even greater flaws. People rarely lose respect for someone who sincerely admits a mistake. They often lose respect for someone who refuses to acknowledge the obvious. Over time, arrogance becomes a prison of its own making. The person becomes surrounded by people who either fear them, flatter them, or eventually abandon them. Honest friendships disappear because honesty is no longer welcomed. Meaningful conversations disappear because vulnerability feels too dangerous. Real growth disappears because learning requires humility. Without realizing it, they slowly create a lonely world where admiration is demanded but genuine connection no longer exists. What once looked like power quietly transforms into isolation, and what once felt like victory becomes the very path leading toward lasting defeat. One of the most self-destructive mistakes a narcissistic person makes is believing that people are disposable while they remain irreplaceable. They assume relationships are endless resources that can be used, manipulated, and discarded whenever they no longer serve their interests. They expect forgiveness without repentance, loyalty without respect, and love without giving any in return. For a while, this mindset may appear to work. They may continue attracting people through charm, confidence, or carefully crafted appearances, but appearances cannot sustain relationships forever. Eventually, every relationship reaches a point where actions speak louder than words, and that is where the narcissist begins to experience the consequences of their own behavior. Healthy relationships are built on trust, honesty, kindness, empathy, and mutual respect. These qualities cannot be faked indefinitely. They require consistency, humility, and genuine care for another person's well-being. A narcissistic individual often sees relationships differently. Instead of viewing people as individuals with emotions, dreams, and boundaries, they view them as sources of validation, attention, control, or personal gain. As long as someone is useful, they are praised and welcomed. The moment that person begins setting healthy boundaries, asking difficult questions, or refusing to be manipulated, the relationship suddenly changes. Affection is replaced with criticism, appreciation becomes contempt, and support turns into punishment. This cycle creates enormous damage because people naturally begin questioning their worth. Many victims spend months or even years trying to understand why someone who once seemed caring has become cold, distant, or cruel. They often blame themselves, believing that if they tried harder, loved more, or sacrificed enough, the relationship could return to what it once appeared to be. What they eventually discover is that they were not loved for who they were valued for what they provided. The relationship was based on control rather than connection, and once control begins slipping away, the narcissistic person often reveals a very different side of themselves. One of the greatest misunderstandings narcissists have is believing that genuine people will tolerate endless disrespect. They mistake patience for weakness. They mistake kindness for dependence. They mistake forgiveness for permission. They assume that because someone stayed yesterday, they will stay forever. But emotionally healthy people eventually recognize unhealthy patterns. They begin noticing that every disagreement somehow becomes their fault. Every success they achieve is minimized. Every mistake is magnified. Every conversation revolves around protecting the narcissist when ego instead of solving real problems. Slowly, they stop making excuses and start seeing reality with greater clarity. When someone reaches that point of clarity, something powerful begins to happen. They stop chasing approval that will never come. They stop explaining themselves to someone committed to misunderstanding them. They stop sacrificing their peace to satisfy impossible expectations. Instead of fighting to save a relationship that constantly drains them, they begin rebuilding themselves. They rediscover confidence, reconnect with supportive people, and establish healthier boundaries. What once felt impossible suddenly becomes necessary. Walking away no longer feels like failure. It feels like freedom. The narcissistic person rarely expects this transformation. They are accustomed to people returning after arguments, apologizing for things they did not do, or accepting blame simply to restore temporary peace. When someone finally refuses to play that role, the narcissist often reacts with confusion. They may increase manipulation, become unusually charming, spread false stories, or attempt to provoke emotional reactions. None of these actions are rooted in genuine love. They are desperate attempts to regain the control they once had. They confuse possession with affection, believing that if they can regain influence, they can restore the relationship to its previous imbalance. What they fail to understand is that trust is one of the most valuable gifts any person can receive, and once it has been repeatedly broken, rebuilding it becomes incredibly difficult. Every lie weakens confidence. Every betrayal creates distance. Every broken promise leaves another crack in the foundation. Eventually, those cracks become too large to ignore. No amount of grand gestures or temporary kindness can erase years of manipulation if true accountability is absent. People may forgive, but forgiveness does not always mean reconciliation. Someone can release bitterness while still choosing not to return to an unhealthy relationship. Another painful consequence is that the narcissist often loses the very people who cared most deeply about them. Genuine friends, faithful partners, supportive family members, and loyal colleagues usually invest tremendous energy into making relationships work. They communicate honestly, give second chances, and hope for meaningful change. Because they value relationships, they stay longer than many others would. Ironically, these are the very people narcissists often take for granted. They assume their loyalty has no limit. They believe they can continue exploiting their kindness without consequences. They fail to recognize that even the most patient heart has a breaking point. Once those sincere relationships are gone, they cannot always be replaced. New acquaintances may admire confidence, success, or charisma for a while, but lasting relationships require character. Character reveals itself over time. Patterns eventually replace first impressions. The same habits that destroyed previous relationships begin damaging new ones. The cycle repeats because the underlying mindset never changes. Different faces enter their life, but the outcome remains remarkably similar. Temporary admiration eventually gives way to disappointment because manipulation cannot create lasting connection. Perhaps the saddest part is that many narcissists mistake attention for love. They believe that as long as people continue noticing them, complimenting them, or speaking about them, they are still winning. But attention is not the same as trust. Popularity is not the same as respect. Being surrounded by people does not guarantee genuine companionship. Real love exists where honesty, empathy, sacrifice, and mutual care are present. It grows through shared experiences, consistent integrity, and emotional safety. Those qualities cannot survive in an environment dominated by control, selfishness, and emotional manipulation. Every meaningful relationship leaves behind opportunities to grow. Healthy people reflect on disagreements, admit mistakes, and become wiser because of difficult experiences. A narcissistic mindset often rejects this opportunity. Instead of asking, "How did my behavior contribute to this outcome?" it asks, "Who can I blame?" Instead of accepting responsibility, it rewrites the story to protect its own image. This refusal to learn guarantees that history repeats itself. Different names, different places, and different circumstances cannot change a pattern that remains untouched. The greatest tragedy is not simply losing relationships. It is losing relationships that never needed to end. Many conflicts can be healed through humility, accountability, forgiveness, and sincere change. But when pride consistently outweighs love, even the strongest bonds begin to break. Over time, the narcissist discovers that manipulation may win temporary compliance, but it never earns lasting devotion. Respect cannot be demanded, trust cannot be forced, and genuine love cannot survive where people are treated as tools instead of treasured human beings. In the end, the relationships they assumed would always be there quietly disappear, leaving behind a life filled with acquaintances but increasingly empty of the deep. authentic connections that give life its greatest meaning. One of the greatest mistakes a narcissistic person makes is underestimating strong people. They often assume that anyone who is kind must also be weak, that anyone who is patient will never leave, and that anyone who forgives will continue accepting mistreatment forever. This misunderstanding becomes one of the biggest reasons for their eventual downfall because they fail to recognize the difference between weakness and emotional strength. Kindness is not weakness. Patience is not surrender. Compassion is not permission for abuse. Truly strong people often remain calm far longer than others, not because they cannot fight back, but because they value peace more than conflict. However, when they finally realize that peace is impossible in a toxic environment, they make a decision that completely changes the situation. They walk away. A narcissistic individual often studies people to discover their emotional needs, fears, and insecurities. Instead of using that knowledge to build trust, they use it to gain control. They notice who longs for acceptance, who fears rejection, who values family, or who struggles with self-confidence. Then they exploit those vulnerabilities. At first, this strategy may seem successful because emotionally wounded people often tolerate behavior they should never have to endure. They keep hoping things will improve. They believe love will eventually soften a hardened heart. They continue giving chance after chance because they want to believe the relationship can be restored. The narcissist interprets this patience as proof that their tactics are working. What they fail to understand is that emotionally healthy people are always growing. They learn from experience. They gain wisdom through hardship. Every painful conversation teaches them something. Every broken promise opens their eyes a little more. Every manipulation becomes easier to recognize. The same person who once doubted themselves slowly begins trusting their own instincts again. The individual who once apologized for everything begins realizing they were carrying burdens that never belonged to them. Confidence does not always return overnight, but it returns one decision at a time. That quiet transformation is something a narcissist rarely notices because they are too focused on maintaining control instead of observing genuine change. One reason narcissists underestimate strong people is because they judge strength by external displays of power. They believe the loudest voice wins the argument. They think intimidation creates authority. They assume dominating conversations proves superiority. Yet emotional strength looks very different. Real strength remains calm under pressure. It refuses to be controlled by constant criticism. It chooses wisdom over revenge. It knows when to speak and when silence carries greater power. Most importantly, it knows when to leave situations that repeatedly damage emotional, mental, or spiritual well-being. This is often the moment that surprises the narcissist the most. They expect endless arguments, desperate pleading, or emotional bargaining. They prepare for dramatic confrontations because those situations allow them to regain attention and control. Instead, they are met with something they never anticipated: quiet resolve. The person they underestimated no longer feels the need to prove anything. They stop defending themselves against false accusations. They stop chasing validation that will never come. They stop trying to convince someone committed to misunderstanding them. Their silence is no longer fear. It is freedom. Their distance is no longer punishment. It is protection. The narcissist frequently mistakes this calm response for temporary resistance. They assume the other person will eventually return because that has often happened before. They believe time alone will weaken someone's resolve. They expect loneliness to drive them back into the same unhealthy patterns. But emotionally resilient people do not spend their time planning a return to dysfunction. They spend it rebuilding the parts of themselves that were neglected. They reconnect with supportive friends, rediscover forgotten dreams, strengthen healthy boundaries, and develop a clearer understanding of their own worth. Each step forward makes returning to manipulation less likely. Strong people also understand something narcissists often overlook. Every relationship should have mutual respect. Respect cannot exist where one person consistently controls, belittles, or manipulates another. Love without respect eventually becomes exhausting. Loyalty without honesty becomes dangerous. Sacrifice without appreciation becomes unsustainable. Emotionally mature individuals eventually recognize these truths. They stop measuring the relationship by occasional moments of kindness and begin evaluating the consistent pattern of behavior. Patterns reveal character far more accurately than isolated incidents. Another reason narcissists underestimate strong people is because they believe everyone values approval as much as they do. They assume people cannot function without constant validation. They think rejection will always break someone's confidence, yet individuals who experience genuine healing begin finding their identity in something much deeper than another person's opinion. Their self-worth no longer rises and falls based on praise or criticism. They understand that another person's inability to value them does not diminish their actual value. This realization becomes incredibly powerful because manipulation loses its effectiveness once someone stops seeking approval from the manipulator. There is also a remarkable difference between temporary compliance and genuine loyalty. Many narcissists confuse the two. Someone may appear obedient simply because they are trying to avoid conflict, protect their children, preserve their workplace, or maintain temporary stability. That outward compliance does not necessarily mean inward agreement. Over time, unresolved pain continues accumulating beneath the surface. One day, the person reaches a point where preserving their own peace becomes more important than preserving a toxic relationship. From the narcissist's perspective, the departure seems sudden. In reality, it was the result of countless disappointments that slowly built over months or even years. Strong people rarely make life-changing decisions impulsively. They often wrestle with them privately. They pray, reflect, seek wise counsel, examine their own hearts, and hope for meaningful change before deciding to move on. Because they value commitment, they usually stay longer than many people realize. They continue believing restoration is possible as long as both individuals are willing to grow. But when they finally recognize that one person is committed only to protecting their ego instead of repairing the relationship, they understand that remaining in the same environment will only produce more pain. Their decision to leave is not driven by hatred, it is driven by wisdom. Once they leave, something unexpected often happens. The emotional energy that was once consumed by constant conflict becomes available for personal growth. They pursue new opportunities, strengthen healthier relationships, develop greater confidence, and experience a level of peace they had almost forgotten existed. Their lives begin moving forward because they are no longer carrying the weight of endless manipulation. Meanwhile, the narcissist is often left wondering why their usual tactics no longer work. The strategies that controlled insecurity cannot control someone who has learned to value truth over approval. The greatest irony is that the narcissist never truly loses because the other person became stronger overnight. They lose because they ignored the quiet growth happening all along. Every attempt to manipulate eventually taught discernment. Every insult eventually revealed the importance of self-respect. Every disappointment eventually encouraged healthier boundaries. The very experiences intended to keep someone emotionally dependent became the experiences that prepared them for lasting freedom. By underestimating the quiet strength of resilient people, the narcissist unknowingly creates the conditions for their own permanent loss, discovering far too late that genuine strength does not need to announce itself. It simply refuses to remain, where respect, honesty, and true love no longer exist.